Hello, my name is Merrill Shapiro, Rabbi Merrill Shapiro. I am the immediate past president of the National Board of Trustees of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. And I am honored to have the opportunity to speak with you today and take a look at the state of freedom of religion here in Florida. There are, of course, many different issues confronting us on a national level that hopefully you've all been following. Issues related to the funding of birth control as part of the Affordable Care Act, issues as far as invocations and issues as far as funding of private religious schools. But here in Florida, we have something unique of which few people are aware. Hope you'll take what I'm about to tell you, spread the word, and let's work together to increase religious freedom here in the state of Florida. So again, I represent Americans United for Separation of Church and State. This is me. You may feel free to contact me at any time. I welcome your questions. And as a parenthetic note, I'll point out that I suspect that there are some of you have scant opportunity to talk to a rabbi about things religious. I'll be happy to talk to you about that as well anytime. I love hearing from you. I love hearing your questions. Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Well, I'm going to move rather quickly, particularly through this early stuff that's comes from the Department of Crash Commercialism at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. We're nonpartisan, an educational organization. We're here to preserve the principle, first enumerated and articulated by Thomas Jefferson, that there exists a wall of separation, separating church and state. It should exist everywhere, but certainly that's the basis for religious freedom, freedom from government intrusion on religion, and freedom from religious intrusion on government here in the United States. So the very First Amendment, not the third, not the fifth, not the seventh or ninth, but the First Amendment to the Constitution points out that, as you can see here, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And we hold that sacrosanct. It's the Constitution, after all. By the way, we regard the First Amendment and the separation of church and state as a conservative value. That is, this is the intent of the founders. So when people talk about liberals, progressives, and all sorts of epithets that go along with them, the truth of the matter is we're talking here about a conservative value, part of the founding ideas of this great experiment we call the United States of America. We go back to 1947. I will be happy to share these slides with you. We're now 73 years old. We've had a long history, and our organization has grown phenomenally into one that reaches into every corner of our great nation. We believe that everybody has an opportunity to practice religion of their choice or not practice at all. As your individual conscience, you have liberty of conscience guaranteed here in the United States. The government must remain neutral. We have a legal department that files lawsuits and does what legal people do. We have a legislative department that lobbies and provides resources for our friends and lobbies those who don't always see things our way in legislators, both on a national level in Washington and in state capitals around the country, including, of course, Tallahassee. We have a grassroots organization that organizes local chapters, but also helps individuals act as advocates in their own community, separate from chapters. And we have a communications department that produces a magazine, runs blogs, and sends out press releases to places like far off Daytona Beach News Journal and papers that serve our community as well. So our religion issues are here. We're concerned about all of these things. Some of them are bigger problems than other here in Florida. I will tell you when the Board of Trustees gets together, people from all over the country, we have a competition in whose state is worse. Mississippi rings in, and Alabama, of course, and then Texas and some Western states. But to me, Florida tops the list as with some of the most egregious violations of the separation of church and state. We have specific projects, Protect Thy Neighbor, helping to protect the rights and privileges in this great country belonging to LGBTQ people. We're concerned about pulpit politicking, that churches and other religious organizations wind up endorsing political candidates, which they may in fact do, but if they do, they lose their tax-exempt status. And people who make donations to politically active churches cannot deduct those donations from their Form 1040 and their income taxes. And Project Inclusion points out that not only are invocations a violation of church-state separation, although we've lost some big cases in court relative to that, but they're divisive and divide us into believers, non-believers, Christians, Jews, Muslims, and so on, and really are best done with a moment of silence or nothing at all. Religion in the public schools is problematic, particularly since children, of course, are so easily molded and their ideas are forming. And I personally grew up in an environment where I was made to feel like a second-class citizen, because when prayers were offered in Jesus' name and Jesus has nothing to do with me as a Jew, it makes us feel as though we don't belong. We're second-class citizens. Lots of tax dollars these days are being faced to programs called faith-based initiatives. The prisons here in Florida, and I don't touch on that in the general part of my talk, but the prisons here in Florida include prisons that are run by religious organizations. And those who subscribe to the dominant religion get all sorts of privileges. Those who do not subscribe to that religion lack those privileges. We have lots of governments that not only offer egregious invocations, but have Christmas displays on the city hall lawns and wind up spending money to support religious activities with which some of us most certainly would not agree. This is the area in Florida that's the most problematic, in that public money is going to religious schools and to fund the tuition of students in religious schools that teach things that I can almost be certain none of us agree to, and in fact find an anathema, would find it very upsetting to know our tax dollars go to pay for this education. You'll see that in a couple of minutes. We're out there protecting the reproductive rights, and yes, the ability of organizations like Hobby Lobby, for example, and what's the name of them? The chicken restaurant. Can they refuse to offer reproductive coverage for their female employees, while many of them will offer male reproductive aids? Sadly, many of you see those advertisements for ED. Often that's covered, but birth control is not. The courts, and this is a big issue related to elections. We can't interfere in elections. We're an Internal Revenue Code 501c3 organization. So we don't take a stand on partisan elections, but the people elected installed judges and have changed the judicial environment even in the past 10 years so that the courts are very different and hear our pleas in a much different. It's much more difficult to get things done in court these days, let's put it that way, as far as the separation of church and state is concerned. Church politicking, again, the use of churches to endorse candidates and say that if you vote for so-and-so, you're going to go to hell. It continues to be a problem here in Florida and throughout the country. So you have the right to believe or not to believe, whatever you want. It's not the government's business. You can give your hard-earned money to religious institutions of your choice or withhold it from your choice. You can make your own decisions about healthcare and reproductive rights. You can marry the person you love, big issue, and you can live your life as you see fit without other people's religious doctrines governing how you behave. This is just from the past few weeks, if you're not aware, a case we're preparing to become involved in. There's a program in Chicago schools, briefly called Quiet Time, that expresses some of the values, it turns out, accidentally or not, of Hinduism. And so there's an organization, as you see at the top of the page, for the separation of Hinduism from our schools. And this is an issue with yoga in gym classes as well, believe it or not. And they feel it's religious intrusion on what's ultimately the Christian environment of public schools, and troubling to some people who don't understand fully, I believe, what is happening. There's beginning recognition that the funding of religious activity means pagans and Wiccans can also benefit from some of these funding programs. Some of you may know that at Christmas time, the end of December, there used to be religious displays in a rotunda in Tallahassee of the state capitol, and along came Wiccans, pagans, and members of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, who said, we have the same rights as they do. And so now at Christmas time, there are all those displays. By the way, Florida does distinguish itself from after the passage of a bill several years ago by a state representative, Gary Siplin of Apopka. And so the state of Florida in December has an official greeting. And that greeting is Merry Christmas. That's a stand in what they perceive as the so-called war against Christmas. And so welcome, you live in Florida, I live in Florida, we're all taxpayers, citizens, and voters. We have an official December greeting, Merry Christmas, whether we like it or not. So pagan schools can receive funds just like religious schools, and but where there's money involved, the big organizations are all lined up and all set and garner most of the benefits of many of these programs, particularly those that support schools. So here in Florida, we have something, if I hope you're aware, called the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship, and I'll call it Scheme. And this was created in the wake of a court case called Holmes versus Bush, in which a challenge was made by an administrator in the Tampa area to the program whereby the state funded not only public school students and private school students, but students in religious schools and even college students who were studying for the ministry. And we won that case, and so we don't have to fund people studying for the ministry. So the forces who want public funding of religious institutions went to an organization called ALEC, Alliance for Legislative Activities, who wrote a bill that was then brought and passed in the Florida legislature. It provides for Florida corporate, it should be Florida corporate tax credit scholarships, in which corporations who have an obligation to pay state taxes can instead divert their money and give it to, and you'll see in the second line from the bottom of that first paragraph, a scholarship fund, a nonprofit scholarship funding organization. So let's take, for example, we know several corporations who participate in this. There's somewhat of a mystery since tax returns are private and not available for public scrutiny. So let's take Walgreens. Let's say Walgreens owes $100,000 in state corporate tax. It can write the $100,000 check to the state treasury and fulfill its obligation. It also has the option to write a $100,000 check to a scholarship funding organization. The biggest and most powerful and most active one is called Step Up for Students. Step Up for Students will then take that $100,000 and distribute it as vouchers for private schools. Somewhere between 75 and 81% of that money goes to religious schools. In the meantime, Walgreens submits their donation, the proof of their donation, to the state treasury, and the state treasury says, you owe us nothing. The problem is when that $100,000 does not reach the state treasury, who makes it up? The truth of it is, you do and I do. We are all paying for that donation that Walgreens makes to Step Up for Students. Step Up for Students, in the meantime, distributes it to religious schools, and those religious schools take it and can, let's come back to this for a minute, use it to send to private religious schools. Let's see if I find the right slide. And those private religious schools can teach whatever they want. And when that $100,000 again does not hit the state treasury, you and I are paying for it. And so a system has come up for funding private religious education. And as you see at this earlier slide, and I'll show you one from much earlier, this past year, $873 million, on the way to $874 million, almost $1 billion, on its way to $1 billion, was funneled out of the state treasury, in 75 to 81% of it to private religious schools. And in the end, we have to make up that $873 million loss to the state treasury, you, me, and all the taxpayers of the state of Florida. By the way, those who support this program say that, let's go find the right slide, say that public schools are failing. So we have to fund these private schools and we have to allow parents' choice. But here you'll see that the Florida Constitution provides, in the second sentence in this section says, it's the paramount duty of the state to make adequate provision for the education of all children residing in its borders. Adequate provision shall be made by law for a uniform, efficient, safe, secure, and high-quality system of free public schools. That's the role of the government, not to, and so when those schools fail, the government doesn't say, oh, we need to fix it. No, let's just send the students off to private schools and have our citizens pay for private education. Running out of time here, so let's go skip a couple of these. I'll be happy to share them with you upon request. And here, the state may not prescribe standards of curriculum. A private school still retains the authority to teach whatever it wants. And so, by the way, here you see in 2012, 2013, it was $229 million. Now it's $875 million and going up from there. That's our money going to fund private, often religious education. And those schools are teaching, among other things, the dinosaurs and human beings probably hung out. They were contemporary with one another. After all, the world is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old. And dragons are very real. You're paying for this education, I'm paying for this education, these students to go to these private religious schools, and you and I are paying for it. Is it possible that fire-breathing dragon really existed? Yes, and it's taught out of a textbook. This has not been updated, but can be, and you're welcome to do the research, a school textbook called Life Science, offered to private religious schools by Bob Jones University Press. You and I are also paying for education that says God used the Trail of Tears to bring many Indians to Christ. And that's taught in a book called America, the Land That I Love. And teachers are teaching that to students in a series called A Becca Book. That series is published by Pensacola Christian College. The wife of the chancellor's name is Rebecca, and so they call it A Becca Book. You and I are also paying to have students in those schools taught that Africa needs religion. It still needs the gospel. Only 10% of Africans can read and write. It's terrible. And that, there's a citation again, that's from a book that kids receive and are taught from Old World History and Geography in a Christian Perspective by the ABECA Book Company, again, Pensacola Christian College. Slave masters were nice guys. It's also part of this education. And that slavery, in fact, was good. Why is slavery good? By the way, this was articulated by a state representative out of the northern part of Jacksonville. His name is Kim Daniels, who said slavery was good. Why? Because it brought pagan blacks from Africa to these shores where they could be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ. That's being taught slavery was good, and you and I are paying for that education. Running out of time, the books tell that the KKK was okay because it used the symbol of the cross and it targeted bootleggers, wife beaters, and so on. There's the textbook it comes from. The Great Depression wasn't so bad as liberals make it sound. There's the textbook as well. The Supreme Court of the United States, and this is the Berger Court that made the decision that would enslave fetuses. And the Berger Court ignored 3,500 years of Judeo-Christian civilization. I'm not sure what that is as a Jew, by the way. The Red Scare isn't over yet. We have to worry about the commies coming in and taking over. That's from the American government and Christian perspective. Mark Twain and Emily Dickinson were a couple of hacks, and here they're critical of Mark Twain and Emily Dickinson, and that's being taught on my dime and yours. Abstract algebra is too complicated. Now, some of us may agree, but that shouldn't be part of the school curriculum, yet it is one we're paying for. It's taught in private religious schools using that Florida corporate tax scholarship scheme. Gay people, of course, have no more claims to special rights than child molesters or rapists. That is being taught to children through a teacher's resource guide for Christian schools from Bob Jones University Press. You're paying for that, I am as well. Global environmentalists are out to destroy the wealth of nations. And there's a citation, globalization is the precursor to the rapture. Adolf Hitler was bad, Muslims are worse. That you're paying for that, I'm paying for that. You should be aware that our tax dollars are going to support the Florida Board of Education. The chairperson says, I won't support any evolution being taught as fact in any of our schools. Your dime and my dime as well. And so we need to rise up and say, this is not right. And we need to put a stop to that. Our tax dollars are being used to support curricula, support ideas that none of us agree with and are an anathema to someone or anyone else. So Florida's Catholics are being called upon to support Seventh-day Adventist schools that teach that the Pope is the Antichrist. Florida's Jews are asked to support Florida's Muslims, while Florida's Baptists are receiving money in schools that teach that the burning of the Quran is a good thing. It's a mess. The government should get out of religion. The government should get out of the idea of funding private religious schools, even using the tuition money to send their kids to those schools. We have rights too, but we've been silent. Here's a way we can organize ourselves and speak out against these kind of programs. I welcome all your questions. I'd love to hear them, both in a question and answer period and beyond. I, again, am incredibly honored and flattered to have been asked to participate, and I thank you very much.